gonna do Zoom participant roll call.
Okay. Karen, if you could let me know who the working group is.
Yes.
You're gonna have to turn your mic on.
Should I just call the names? Okay, so Courtney Wakey. Daniel Huerta.
Hello?
Is that Daniel?
Yeah.
Hello?
Can you say present, Daniel?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yes. This is Daniel Huerta.
Daniel, just confirming that you can hear us. Could you say yes?
I can barely hear you.
Okay.
Okay, Christina Kind. Maybe you can't hear me.
Now I have audio. Yes, present.
Okay, is there anyone else from the working group who is online who has not said present yet? And if you cannot be heard, put your name in the chat.
Yeah, there's.
Okay, so if no one else is putting their name in the chat, then I think that Daniel Huerta and Christina Kind are present online.
Chat is disabled.
Chat is disabled.
Chat should.
It's really just chatting.
Yeah, it should be there.
Okay, it should be.
Can you hear me? This is Christina Hill.
Yes, Christina, we can hear you. Yes, can you hear us?
Very echoey.
Technical part of it is a challenge.
Just like a call. You have a Polycom phone or something? You just put the phone in the room, we turn off the video and
Old school style.
old school.
I don't know, I don't think we do.
No. Okay.
So why don't we take another break, a 10-minute break, and try to figure this out? And we'll at least come up with a plan of action for if we can't get the sound to work, so we can tell everybody. My apologies.
Okay, 10-minute break. We'll be back right at 2 o'clock.
Sorry, everybody.
Karen, I can actually hear you just fine now. This is Christina Kind.
Okay, and then when we speak, are you hearing an echo?
I am not. It seems to have fixed itself.
Okay, thank you.
Can anyone else online confirm that by unmuting and telling us that you can hear us clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you guys pretty well now.
I can hear you.
Cindy.
Cindy Gustafson, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Cindy.
What about Christina Hill?
I can hear you, but my chat is disabled.
Her chat is.
Chat.
Okay. We can live with that.
All right, let's try.
Okay. It sounds like we can proceed. Council, are we okay to not continue with roll call? Are we satisfied?
I think everyone who's on the working group who's online has responded. So I think we've gotten that covered. And it sounds like the audio is back, so members of the public who are online can hear what's happening. So I think we're good to go.
Perfect, thank you, Marcia. I'm gonna recommend we move on from the icebreaker and not try to do icebreaker online. Okay, we're good with that. Okay, apologize to all. Sometimes those things happen. Let's move forward now into the meat of our agenda, and we're gonna go over to Jacob here, so. I'm gonna move us on to item 8. We're gonna hear items 8A and B, which are reports together, as I understand it. This includes the cultivating community, conserving the basin work plan and engagement plan. Jacob Stock from TRPA is gonna present on these, and they are informational only, so I'll hand it to you, Jacob.
Thank you, Brendan. For those of you who don't remember from the break, my name is Jacob Stock, Senior Planner with TRPA and former Segway Tour Guide. I'm here to provide a little background on cultivating community, conserving the basin. Just to give you an overview of the project work plan and the schedule moving forward, along with a summary of the community engagement plan and some of the community engagement work that we've done so far. This is an informational item only, so we welcome your discussion. That's what this is for, but no action is required. Actually, we gotta go ahead a little bit in the slides. I'll tell you how to stop. Okay, keep going. Here, back to who we are. So this is probably, a lot of you probably already know this, but I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. TRPA, founded in 1969 to lead the collaborative effort to preserve, restore, and enhance the basin. The long-range planning team is who you're working with here. We manage policy and regulations, the policy and regulations of TRPA, responding to emerging issues, like, for example, the need for equitable and sustainable housing options in our communities. You've met Karen Fink, our program manager. Alyssa Bettinger is a senior planner with us. She led the previous phase of Tahoe Living and is working on implementing that phase along with getting more workforce housing projects on the ground. I'll be managing this phase. Kaylee Arboleda is right over here. She's our assistant planner and outreach coordinator for this project, so she'll be working really closely with you all on this project. You'll also see Michelle Brown today. She's our associate planner and she works in our deed restriction program. Jessica Gillies is our executive assistant. She's under the table right now, but there she is. And then, of course, we have our big boss, John Hester, Chief Operating Officer and Regional Planning Director. So that's the, oh, and of course, Marcia right here, legal team, not long-range planning team, but she's our legal counsel for Tahoe Living. So legal questions, go to Marcia, please. Next slide. We also have an amazing team of consultants working on this project led by Ramey and Associates. You've met Eric, who's principal at Ramey. I believe that's right. Okay, and we have BAE and SiteCon assisting with economic and planning analysis. Some of you may know Aaron from BAE. He lives in Truckee and he's done a lot of work here in the basin. Bill Anderson, he's in San Diego. He's the principal at SiteCon and he's working on the statewide TDR program, so bringing a lot of expertise to this project. Mariposa is spearheading our community engagement, and Chris, who's the principal there, worked on our transportation equity study and has done some great work for us here in cultivating communities. And then ESA is leading our environmental analysis. Next slide.
Oops, hang on. Clicked on something.
Well,
There you go.
we can get going on this. Yeah, so with that, we'll just take a little trip down memory lane of what this group has worked on so far. Some of you will recall that when the working group first started on the Tahoe Living Initiative back in 2020, you grouped policy options based on short, medium, and long-term phases or objectives. So the first phase focused on allowing accessory dwelling units and incentivizing motel conversions into residences. The second phase or the medium-term phase that passed in 2023, set policies and rules to reduce the cost of building new affordable and workforce housing with deed restrictions. And then cultivating community, this third phase represents the longer-term objectives for Tahoe Living. And this is based on input from this working group. We're focusing on the growth management system, as Brendan introduced, on equity and on fees and permitting as they relate to housing. Next slide. So cultivating community is aimed at seeing how TRPA policy and rules can make housing more accessible while maintaining and improving environmental protections. In cultivating community, we want to consider how our development rights and fee system, like I mentioned, can better support housing accessibility and prevent displacement. So this will result, all this is going to result in changes to the regional plan and code of ordinances with the goal of getting more of the type of housing that we need. And all of the changes to the regional planning code will be analyzed and evaluated through an environmental impact statement. Next slide. So collaboration with the community is a critical part of this project, as is environmental protection. Accessible quality housing for our community and environmental protection can go hand in hand. We really believe that. And so with that yes and approach as our North Star for this project, we want to find common ground to continue to rethink and shape TRPA's role in the future of housing. Next slide. So I'm gonna start with some definitions because the definitions can get a little sticky here. So here's some important terms up on this slide. We have affordable, moderate, and achievable housing, which are specifically defined in the Code of Ordinances in Chapter 90. You can see the citations up there if you want to double check. And these are specifically tied to categories of deed restrictions. But there are times when we're talking about these things that we need to use more general terms. And so you'll hear us say affordable and workforce housing or just workforce housing. And this is shorthand to encompass any housing that is affordable to local workers, families, and seniors. This could include naturally affordable housing that is not deed restricted, as well as deed restricted housing. So this is just a general term that we're going to use. It's not defined in the code, but sometimes we need to speak generally about the type of housing that we're trying to get built. Next slide. Okay, so let's get into the work plan. That's why we're here. Cultivating community is divided into 4 broad phases. And if you look back at the minutes of the previous meetings, which I'm sure you all did in detail, you'll notice that all of this work is based on past conversations with this working group. So everything we're doing is stuff that we've talked with you about before. Right now, we're wrapping up the listen and explore phase. And we'll get into more detail about how we engage the community in this phase. At this point, we want to work with you to review what we've heard from our outreach and shape the goals and desired outcomes for this project. The assess and generate phase is the next upcoming phase of this project. We have experts to assess our code and regional plan to help generate new policy ideas. And as we study potential new policies, we may want to organize small subject matter groups in spring 2025, so spring of next year, to dig deeper into policy ideas. So more to come on that, hopefully in January. In the explore, define, and test phase, that's number 3, summer and fall 2025. Once we have draft policy recommendations, we can further study, refine, and test those recommendations and the environmental impacts of those recommendations through an EIS. And then finally, in the develop and finalize phase, we'll synthesize the input that we hear from you and from other governing bodies and develop a final proposal. And so throughout all 4 phases of this project, we will be consulting with you, we'll be consulting with the governing board and RPC and with the public throughout. Next slide. All right, so here's a nice little Gantt chart. for you to look at. So, what does this all look like in practice? How are we gonna get this all done? It's a lot of work. Starting with task 2, you can see up there, we started on that last month. Our consultants team is assessing gaps in equity and climate resilience in our code and regional plan, and which populations in the basin are most vulnerable to those inequities. This, along with other research and input from the public, will help inform the development of policy and code recommendations in phase 3. Or, excuse me, task 3. So you'd see task 3, policy and code development. We'll start developing updates to our policies and eventually code in task 4. So that's where we start coming out with possible recommendations. In task 5, we'll look at developing a pathway for quicker approval, more certain approval of projects with environmental and housing benefits. We have rounds of public workshops and engagement throughout all 4 phases of the project, like I mentioned in the last slide. The EIS in task 7, that's gonna take about a year to complete, so we'll start that in June. And finally, we'll be developing a toolkit with lessons learned from this project for future planning processes. So with all that said, because there was a 6-month delay in the grant funding for this project due to the state budget shortfall, we understand there's a possibility of getting a grant extension on this timeline. So we should find out more in the next few weeks about that, and we'll be updating the schedule if we do get an extension to better utilize that extra time. Next slide, please. So as we move into the assess and generate phase, this next phase of this project, our consultant team will be analyzing land use, housing, and climate impacts in the basin. They're actually already doing that. Those studies will inform an exploration of policy recommendations. So we'll start thinking about what are some of the policies that can help meet the outcomes that we set. And we'll continue to work with you and the public on those policies. So that's all I have on the work plan. I don't know if Brendan, if you guys want to have any discussion about what I've presented.
Sure, thanks, Jacob. Why don't we ask questions or anyone have comments for Jacob on the working group? Not seeing any. Jessica, do you see any hands raised online? Oh, looks like we may have one. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you could go back to the last slide, that would be helpful. Awesome. I have 2 questions. So one, can you talk more about what is the permitting pathway? What is that? You kind of did an overview, just a little bit more detail on that. And then 2, it seems a little strange to me, or maybe you could explain kind of the thinking behind having the EIS being initiated before you have draft policy and code. And then also kind of at the end, you've got the final EIS sort of in line with the final hearings and the final draft coming out before that. So it seems like you would want to have the hearings when the final EIS is already out and kind of all the information is available, and you want the final draft to sort of, or the final EIS, like basically ensure that it's capturing anything that would come up in the draft policies and codes. So I feel like it's a little bit backward, but maybe there's stuff going on behind the scenes that I'm just not kind of thinking about.
Yeah, I can do the second question. Do you want to take the first question?
Sure. So the permitting pathway, one of the things that we heard quite a bit in the last, the previous phases is that we really need to find a way to get projects through the permitting process faster that meet our housing goals and our environmental goals. And that's really something that the state of California prioritizes as well. So we have in the scope to basically develop a process where we can analyze those projects more quickly in permitting. And so that's what you see there. So we would be looking at developing a draft of that, at the beginning of 2024. And then that would be something that we're talking to you and the public about in this next phase of public workshops. Do you already know what kind of housing that's for? Is it just for all, affordable, moderate, achievable housing, or that's what we anticipate right now? I don't anticipate it not being for deed restrictive housing, but there will be a process so we can, you know, consider other things during that process.
Okay, yeah, I can speak to the second question. So as I noted earlier, we didn't get the money for this project for 6 months after, we had planned to get it, so we had to condense this timeline a little bit. We worked with our consultant team to figure out how to get an EIS complete, an adequate EIS complete, and still do the type of policy analysis and research that we felt like we needed to do. So at that front end of the EIS, we will have a solid idea of the policies that we're gonna be looking at. We may not have the specific language for the regulations, or maybe, very specific language for what's gonna go into the final recommendation, but we'll know enough to get started on an EIS. And then, with our timeline, we have to, be all hands on deck until the end. So, it takes about a year to complete an EIS. It's a big lift.
And if I could just add on to that, a lot of the beginning part of the EIS is gathering existing conditions and things like that, which we, can start on now.
I'll just add that I really hope you get the extension on the timeline. I feel like there's so much kind of crammed in at the end, and it just looks really ambitious. I feel like it's a lot probably for staff, it's probably a lot for all stakeholders to participate in and really have the time to evaluate. I feel like that's happening kind of in some of the previous iterations too, and so I think the additional time would probably be helpful for everybody. So I guess fingers crossed on that.
Thanks, Rob.
To counter that, I think we need to be more aggressive and try to get stuff done sooner than later. Housing is a huge need. Momentum is key in anything. And it's so hard to get stuff through. We need to figure out solutions sooner. I respect the process, however we can nest things and stuff. And we should be doing work. That's what we're here for. We need to really push hard on this. So however we can move it quicker. Thanks.
Any other thoughts on work plan? There's a long way to go here, so. Mia.
Yeah, I appreciate the timeline and the ambitious goal. I think it's really great to have a deadline and try to stick to it rather than already assume that you need an extension. So I really support trying to stay on the schedule. I guess my question really is, sounds like, is the consultant gonna prepare recommendations on sort of the gaps? Or are you gonna work with the working group to kind of identify what the gaps are? Or are we reacting to what the consultant is determining, or is it iterative?
Eric?
I would say it's gonna be an iterative process. So not only are we getting feedback from the community members, and we have a community partner group, as well as been meeting with stakeholders in the community. We'll be meeting with this group over the course of the project to not just react to, but generate ideas. We're gonna start that iterative process later on this afternoon in this meeting, but we'll continue throughout the process overall.
Thanks, Eric. Any other? Yeah, we have one here.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm a new member. I didn't really give much information, but I guess I am a little concerned, having read the work plan pretty thoroughly and looking at particularly the prioritized community, who it seems like we've rushed through the process through that part of the engagement. So while I hear the desire to push, it does feel like prioritized communities were already rushed through the process without a lot of education. So when we talk about the community engagement component, I can definitely bring up more, but I think what is already kind of prevalent is that prioritized communities are being rushed through this process without a lot of interaction and understanding of the process. So without undermining their engagement, I just want to be, and being a nonprofit worker myself, very aware of grant timelines, just want to know that we strike a balance, to your point earlier.
That's a good comment. Thank you. Other thoughts in the room? Jessica, are there any hands raised?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. I think we're comfortable. Jacob, you have more on this item, right?
Yeah, I got, if you switch ahead a couple slides, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the community engagement plan, and hopefully that can speak to some of the concerns about engaging priority communities. So Yeah, you'll find a copy of the project's community engagement plan in your packet. I'll briefly walk you through some of the key elements of that plan here. So we aim to conduct an accessible process that engages a diverse audience. That's really important to this project, and leads to a shared vision of housing, at Tahoe. But we also aim to build a sustained and meaningful relationships to address challenges in the future. So we hope that the engagement that we do with this project, we can carry on into future projects and to make them more successful and more responsive to the needs of the community. Next slide. So in each phase of the project, we're hosting community workshops. So in all of those 4 phases, we'll have a workshop both on the North Shore and the South Shore. We're holding meetings with our leadership, including the Tahoe Living Working Group in each of those 4 phases. We'll be doing online outreach and throughout the process. And consulting with our community partner group, which is a group representing our equity priority community. So we'll be meeting with them, I believe 6 times throughout the process and also engaging with them throughout. And we also have what's called a CBO mini grant. So that's small grants for community-based organizations to help us get out and engage some of those priority communities folks that we really try to engage and get creative in how we engage. Next slide. So a little more about the community partner group. So housing equity is a key focus of this project, and so as a result, engaging groups that are most impacted by housing inequity is really crucial to the success here. The transportation equity study identified equity priority communities and community priority zones, which are detailed here on this slide. And we're trying to bring those forward and engage these groups through the community partner group. So that's a 12-member group. Denise Vega is here today, and she's our liaison between CPG and Tahoe Living Working Group. So we're trying to work with that group to increase our ability to engage impacted communities and to bring more of an equity lens to this project than maybe we've had before. And we're also trying to liaise between the Tahoe Living Working Group and the community priority group so that there's really synergy between those 2 groups. Next slide. So we're also tracking key performance indicators for our public engagement, including specific engagement targets that we're trying to hit through all of our meetings and outreach for this project. Next slide. For example, we're collecting data through post-meeting surveys to determine participant comprehension of the materials that we're giving and demographics of those participating. So for example, we have a target of that 30% of meeting participants live in a community priority zone or identify with a priority community demographic. So that's a goal for every meeting that we hold, every survey that we put out. And we're using this data to continually improve the outreach that we're doing to better engage the community and to make our engagement more meaningful for those who are participating. And I think that's all I have for that right now. I don't know if you guys have any comments or discussion.
Great. So does that wrap up the reports?
Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, great. So let's take some additional working group comments and then we'll go to public comment on the reports. And we can do a little interplay. So members of the public, if you do have a question or comment, let's take a few working group comments and then go ahead and raise your hand and come on up. And if I could just ask members for the note taking to say your name before you make a comment, that'd be great. So Mia.
Hi, Mia Khan. I have a question. So it sounds like the community outreach is really focused on these key equity communities, right? So focus is bonusing its key equity communities, reach out, nonprofit, work with the community. However, it seems like when these things go to governing board, it's usually homeowners or other folks who are maybe not in these key community areas that are maybe the most vocal at times, you know, and have a lot to say about, you know. So I'm curious, is there an engagement strategy for all those folks? And then question, what voices do you listen to, right? Just putting that out there. Are they the same?
I can start and others can add in. So I think what Jacob showed in that one slide was we do have multiple different methods for reaching out to different groups. So for every kind of touch point on this, like as we're developing policy, as we're getting the final, you know, the environmental impact statement ready, we'll have a series of public workshops. So we'll have workshops on the North Shore and the South Shore like we did for the first phase. We also, Jacob touched on this briefly, but didn't get into it a lot. We're also doing some small groups. Eric and his team convened some, you know, different groups like the environmental groups, neighborhood groups, developers. So we are doing small groups throughout the process as well to get people's feedback. And then in addition, we have the community partner group, which convenes kind of in parallel with the Tahoe Living Working Group, but they'll meet a little more often. And then we're also doing these mini grants where up to four community-based organizations will kind of convey some of the materials that we're conveying and get those out to their networks. So I would say, did I miss anything? I think that's kind of the different ways that we're reaching out to all the different groups.
Good question, man. Rob?
Rob Olson. And what I'm missing too are the people that aren't able to be a part of this community, right? That have to travel to come to work, right? They're not represented here at all. They come here, they work, they leave, right? They're not represented at all. They don't have time to be engaged in it. And it's not just in construction, it's all of the industries here. And then what is the impact each day of all those people coming from out of the area, Sparks, wherever, to the area? Every day that goes by, what's the impact versus having homes that are local that people would live in and just walk to work or take a commuter, you know, shuttle to work, so.
Yeah, so we're definitely always open to anyone. If you see a group that is missing or that you want to include, definitely like let us know or reach out to them. We do have Katie Houston is representing employers on this group. We also have Christina Kind from the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation and Heidi Hildrum from the Tahoe Prosperity Center, who, you know, they have kind of represent employment to some extent, but there, yeah, if you see other ways that we can improve that, definitely let us know.
Yeah, I would add that we also have similar representation on the community partner group. So, for example, United Way of Northern Nevada is represented on that group, and they, you know, would engage with some of those folks who live down the hill and come up here to work.
Jessica?
Is there a list of the stakeholders on the community priority group? Because I didn't see it anywhere, and so I was curious who was on it. Just because in all the engagement for community-based organizations, I never saw the Violence Free or Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless. And those are key stakeholders, so I was just curious about some of these groups that have been left out.
Yeah, we do have a list. It wasn't published in the packet. I'm sorry, that was an oversight. So I can make sure to get that out to the Tahoe Living Working Group.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah.
I'm a little bit curious going both on everyone's kind of question on when we're talking about this engagement. One, the KPI of 30% for the priority communities is a little bit concerning, as does feel disproportional. But also in just the phase one questioning, the questions generally felt that they targeted developers and homeowners or potential home buyers. They actually didn't feel like they impacted renters or people who wouldn't have access to be able to talk about basic knowledge of housing needs, which felt like an inaccessible way to do community engagement. So I guess the questions that I have is, like, how were the questions vetted? And what was the consideration on the prioritized communities and like educating them prior, not post, to having these community engagement, forums?
I guess I can try and answer that question. So when we looked at kind of the overall scope of the project, right? Because we're, as Jacob mentioned, we're breaking it down into multiple phases. In each phase, we have different types of questions and different types of information we're trying to solicit from different community members and different segments of the community. So the first thing we did was we have a pretty long draft for each phase of the kinds of questions we think we're gonna be asking during that phase. And for this first phase, we spent some time kind of honing in on the 2, 3, 4, 5 questions we thought were sort of most pertinent that we could ask across different groups of people, whether they're homeowners, renters, whether they're developers or neighborhood organizations, to better get a sense of some of the key issues within the community that folks see, some of the information needs they're curious about, and then some of the ways that they see this project playing out in terms of outcomes or actions that we might take as part of this process. So we kind of had that framework and we looked at it. If you have suggestions for how to reframe language around questions or ways that we can better ask some of those questions for certain priority communities, I mean, I'm certain that we would be happy to take that feedback specifically and we can tailor and target questions. We're actually in the process of developing sort of the outreach toolkit for those mini grants, and the questions are more tailored and targeted towards renters and seasonal workers and populations who maybe in the vein of those types of questions. So we can certainly edit and revise based on any feedback you want to provide to us.
I guess it's like the concept as a whole, right? To ask average folks to understand what development rights are in the basin. That is a high level question for someone who has had to engage with it. Even myself, I'm a lawyer by trade, having to read and find the information, that is a high level ask. And it just feels, if people aren't educated enough to provide feedback that is useful for us, that then imbalances the community input by nature of education. And so that is a way that I think build on the reputation that TRPA has of lacking transparency, because information isn't transparent. And if you are only testing post, then you don't even know what background information they had to begin with. And this is just like when you're from a racial equity perspective, transparency is base key for race equity, and it's a little concerning to see the materials talk about equity without putting such an emphasis on race. Or clearly understanding how race equity works in community engagement. So that is a little bit of a frightening thing. And if y'all get to know me, this is the person I am in the room. These are the topics that I bring up. But also that's kind of highlighted in the groups that were showcased and on the plan of who we're doing outreach for. It's a really odd perspective to come from a BIPOC community and see, oh, Latinos only engage here. So I'm only going to these specific groups as opposed to taking people as a whole. They're going to their employers. They're probably more engaged with their employers. You said they were coming and going. We just have really limited ways that we're looking at priority communities in this document. And that is a little bit alarming for me in question approach, in group selection and otherwise. So.
And I'll just say, one thing is we didn't talk specifically about development rights in our first round of community engagement, right? Because we wanted to make it more accessible. We talked more about people's experiences with housing and housing issues in the region. So we did try and bring it back to people's personal experiences with housing in the area and what they perceived as some of their needs or some of the ideas that they might have as a different way to access and to build education over time, right? Because we're building up over time, but totally hear your point on development rights and trying to tailor the information and provide people with the foundational education that they need to really engage meaningfully in the conversation.
Yeah, if I could Karen Fink, if I could add to that, one of the things that we are going to do throughout these next few months is have some educational sessions. So on January 15th, we are planning to do a development rights 101, session for people, the community partner group and Tahoe Living and the public at large. And one of the activities that we're going to do next today is to hear from this group what other, education you would like to get and also to prioritize that to some extent. So we do have some time, over the next few months to do some of that education. And we were struggling a bit, like again, welcome your input, starting a process and trying to go out to the different groups without having met with some groups yet to get the input about what other groups we should be meeting with. That was a bit of a challenge for us. So one of our key questions that we asked every group that we met with is who else should we be engaging? So that is definitely an ongoing discussion, and we would like to hear how else, we could better engage with different groups.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. That's why you're here. So maybe there's some offline opportunities after this. It sounds like you do have a lot of ideas, so maybe there's some room for, I know you're busy.
I'm good for this one.
Right, well, maybe that's a great opportunity to welcome your feedback. Mia, I see,
Mia was
but
first.
I know,
Or-
but Emily, you haven't gone yet, so let's
Yeah,
go
you
to
go
Emily first and then we'll go to Mia.
I was just gonna say, all this feedback is really great. I also appreciate the amount of effort this whole process takes to start and really get underway. I'm wondering if there's either future offline opportunities or, we can email you if we have other ideas or members of the group have other ideas of other ways we can diversify the outreach experience for everybody.
Yeah, I think certainly, emails, phone calls, all of that is always welcome and appreciated.
Yeah, we'll make sure that information is readily available for everyone, so they go to the same spot. Yeah.
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, I've been working with TRPA for 18 years, and it's taken this long to kind of really begin to understand how all the pieces work. And so I think one of the real challenges, especially kind of hearing from your perspective here, most renters don't know what it takes to develop housing. So if you say, hey, you want housing? Do you need more housing? The answer is yes. Right, but then you don't understand the nuance of where the equity pieces come in around, say, coverage, line coverage, height, density, all these things, which are really kind of things that kind of prevent this type of housing, right? Because really what we see, which works phenomenally well, is what? Single family homes. Because that 30% coverage works brilliantly. You only need 1 unit of use. That 10,000 square foot home could put 10 apartments in there, but then you need 10 units of use. And that's impossible to get. That's the kind of dialogue I would like her folks to see. So they begin to understand what's actually set up, right? Where are the cards stacked? Who's the winner and the loser in the current regime today? And if we look at it, let's just call a spade a spade. 80% of all the houses in the Tahoe region are single family homes. Average unit size is 3,000 square feet. They get 1 unit of use, couple sewer units, done. Add an ADU, easy. Build 10 units, impossible. Get all the requirements you need, all the sewer units, all these things. I feel like I really would hope that we put the real issues on the table for people to begin to understand if we're really just talking bonus units, right? So then you take the hypothetical off the table. It's not people's vision of, oh my God, it's like New York, you're turning this into Manhattan, it's rural, we don't want that density, oh my God. How do you take that away? Can you just say pilot? Just take one example and run it through the gauntlet. And then example, if this was a single family home, this is what you get. Cakewalk. If you want to build 3 stories density, this is what you get. Death by 1,000 razor blade cuts. So what is it, right? And then maybe there's a way to simply cartoon it out or something really like where language actually doesn't even matter. Where then you show, here's a lot. 30% coverage, single family home works brilliantly. And we saw this with the consultant reports. You start to add density, none of it works. And then where do you go? Where do you get the coverage? Where do you do that? Oh, guess what? There's no places. There's no coverage bank to go to, really. You have CTC. But there's no, so like, let's just call this, let's pull it apart, put it on the table and really, like autopsy it. And then just let's see it, and then let's bring it forward, you know, because at least we then know what we're dealing with. Let's diagnose it.
It's always nice to hear from you. Yeah, are we gonna be doing that essentially, Jacob or Karen?
Yes, that is what we need you guys to help us with. So that's why all of you are on this working group, because you all, bring that understanding or you bring a different perspective. So, yeah, and Jacob also, I think, touched on that. We do want to do a lot with you in the next few months. The next few months are, I think, the most exciting part there, where we're going to be, doing that, digging into the policies. And so we do anticipate getting some small groups together to dig into different aspects of this, because I don't think in this large of a group, we're going to be able to do that. So we are planning to have convene some smaller groups.
Great, Vince?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we together represent a lot of very diverse interests. I don't know the people you guys do. I'm not even allowed to live in the basin based on my role as a California appointee to the board. So I don't have this in-depth knowledge of the community leaders in the basin, but that's why we're all here. So our job on this group, all of us, is to bring our knowledge and our connections to this work so that we can get everyone we need to engaged. Because as a governing board member, I can respond, we get a very small view into the community at our meetings. It's mostly very wealthy homeowners who are retired who can come to our meetings in the middle of the day and yell at us. It's pretty much what happens every single meeting for wanting to make any changes. We need to get out there into these communities, but we don't all, the staff and the board don't have these connections. That's what we can all bring. So please open up your Rolodexes, help invite people, because you know so many people that we don't. And that's what we need to do. We need to get everyone involved, because the people who need our help the most are not getting their voices to the board at these meetings. And that's a huge problem. And we have to just rely on data and surveys and things to overcome what we see at our board meetings and our committee meetings all the time. So please help bring your people to around this table with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Vince.
There is one hand raised online.
Okay, let's go to a working group member comments online. It sounds like we do have one hand raised. So if you could state your name prior to your comment, thank you.
Erin Casey, if you can unmute, you can. go ahead
Yeah, I'm
and address
unmuted. Hi, everyone. Erin Casey, I'm here with the Tahoe Housing Hub. I'm not actually on the committee, but just a member of the public. And wanted to mention that the organization is a 501c4. And the reason for that is in order to really engage the public in a broader way around housing related issues. And so I think that in terms of public outreach and engagement, there's opportunity for us to sort of pass along information and really assist with this effort when it comes to trying to get the information to people that maybe haven't in the past been able to participate, knew how to participate. So that's the first piece. And then the other is regarding the development rights and the ways in which we communicate about those publicly. It's incredibly confusing. Not only for those of us who work in it sometimes, but certainly for those who don't. And so one of the things that we're actively working on are ways to communicate about development rights, among other things, to those that we work with, particularly homeowners looking to build accessory dwelling units. Some of the ideas have been to take an analogy to describe development rights. There are a variety of different ways I think we can do it, but I think that given that work that we're doing, there might be opportunity to partner on some of that communication and some of those tools that might be useful as you are engaging the public, and then trying to set sort of a baseline when it comes to public understanding and awareness around the development rights system and other more complex code components that will then, I think, help people to engage in a way that feels more meaningful to them and ultimately results in more meaningful feedback to the process. So I just wanted to put that out there and let you all know that we're here, we're tracking what's happening, and are happy to assist in any way that we can to help sort of spread the word about this work to bring more people to the table.
Great, thank you. Jessica?
There are no other hands raised.
No others? Why don't I go to Sophia and then Gavin and then members of the public, I'll ask you next if you have any comments.
Yeah, I hope I'm not going too far down the rabbit hole, but I just want to talk about a couple of the questions that are in that sort of list for the public to weigh in on. I think it starts on page 4 of that agenda item. In like in the third one, for example, there's a couple of questions I'm a little confused about. So one of them is what types of housing at different affordability levels is being produced in the region and within each jurisdiction, what types of housing protections such as anti-displacement measures are currently in place in the region and within each jurisdiction. There's some questions that I feel like should be answered by the agency. That's not really like an opportunity for public input, just that's sort of like what is it, kind of factual, not, I guess just not an opportunity for public perception. And then also, in phase 4, there's a question that says, how should affordable workforce focused developments be streamlined for approval? I didn't realize that was already sort of baked into the work plan, but I think it's interesting that that's a question for phase 4 for public input when that's something that's starting very early on in the work plan. I think that's starting almost right now. So to me, it's the question that people should be weighing in on before you kind of start doing the draft permitting process for streamlining development. So just a couple of kind of in the weeds questions about how that's formulated and if we're asking all the right questions at the right time.
Do you want to respond to that now, or will that come up later?
Are you looking at the staff report? Can you tell us which exact page and the staff report number that's on the web page? If that's what you're looking at. So it's item number 7, A and B. This is the community engagement plan. The first question was on page, let's see here. On page 5, the very last question, what types of housing at different affordability levels is being produced in the region and within each jurisdiction? That's a question for the public to weigh in on, that I think is more like just an agency question, sort of reflecting the data, maybe presenting it for how people feel about that might be the question. And then what types of housing protections such as anti-displacement measures are currently in place in the region and within each jurisdiction, again, sort of like just what are they? And then maybe people want to weigh in on if there should be more, or if there's something we can do to make those protections, more solidified, I guess. And then the next question that I referenced was on page 6 of that same document under phase 4, the second question, how should affordable workforce focused developments be streamlined for approval? In my first reading, I kind of thought like under what circumstances, if any, should TRPA consider streamlining workforce affordable housing? It sounds like that's sort of already baked into the process, but if that's the question, I would think you'd want feedback on it when you're sort of developing that draft permitting timeline rather than in phase 4, which feels like kind of far down to be asking for feedback about it. I'm tracking if you want to. Do you want to answer or?
Yeah, I can answer sorry, and I should introduce myself each time. Thank you, Brendan. Eric Turkovich with Brandon Associates. For your first set of questions, those were our initial brainstorms to get ideas out onto paper, and then we refine those as we actually go to the community. So we will engage with the working group and staff here at TRPA and other staffs around the region to answer some of those questions that you mentioned before that are not necessarily ones that community members are going to answer. So it's a little bit of an iterative process of us getting ideas down onto paper and then refining them as we go into the process. So you can see even the questions in phase 1 that we drafted here morphed a little bit as we got to the community process and are much clearer and much simpler for community engagement in general. So I would say that answers the first part of your question. Do you want to answer the streamline?
So you will be collecting some of that data and sort of presenting it.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. I guess I would just say on any of this, I know we're presenting a lot of information to you and we don't have enough time to like in this meeting fully get all of your input. So like Eric, I heard you mention a point that you had concerns about the 30% representation. So, I would really encourage everybody if you send us comments on these 2 documents. They're definitely, kind of living documents, and I don't think they're set, they're not set in stone. But we wanted to let you know the direction that we are headed in, and yes. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I don't know if that answered all your questions, Sophia, but maybe, I think in the interest of time, if we.
Send them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thanks, and I can make it, I think, quick and then come back to it at some in the future, but as far as community outreach goes and some of the questions, I think it'd be really helpful. Beyond just what development's rights are, but why we have development rights, so all of TRPA's rules are designed to protect the environment. Well, maybe not all, but almost all. So explaining that the development rights, coverage, all these things come from a place to protect the environment, not a place to limit what you can do with your land, and especially as we've had more and more turnover of residents. Last handful of years, and more people living out of the basin that maybe don't fully understand why we have these rules, but are looking to potentially relocate. I think it's a really good opportunity for some education and maybe even a question around like, why do you think we have these rules? It's some of that maybe sure we get that understanding in there. We have a lot of these rules for good reasons. Yeah, like Karen said, I know TRPA is doing some trainings, so we can talk a little bit more about that when we close. Let's go, members of the public in the room. Let's give you an opportunity to speak on items 8A and B. These are the reports. Would anyone like to come up to the podium and make a comment? Come on up and please state your name. You can move that microphone down a little bit. Yeah, turn it on.
Amelia Richmond, thank you all for being here today. I just wanted to especially thank Ms. Kang and Ms. Gonzalez for their comments. I think really working to try to bridge the gaps and to really explain to the public the connections between development rights and the permitting process and the policies that I know you all are going to be working so hard on and how that actually impacts housing. I think it's really great if there's going to be some trainings, but I love also the idea of cartoonized or like anything that just helps make this understanding, because I do think it matters the questions that are going out into the public, that they're actually helping people understand how these policies impact them, because people know that they need housing and they know that it's too expensive and that we're lacking inventory. And a lot of people, know their own housing goals and aspirations, but they don't understand what the impacts of these policies will be. And so, thank you for your work on that front. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Nick, you good? Okay. Jessica, how about public online? Go ahead. I'll just say, members of the public online that would like to make a public comment on this item, please go ahead and use the raise hand function now or press *9 on your telephone.
Christina Hill, please unmute yourself.
You might want to pull that microphone a little bit closer to you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to kind of echo what Gavin said about making the environment part of the conversation. I mean, it would be great if everybody that wanted to live in Tahoe could, but there are limits and caps on development, and I'm not sure how those are going to be impacted by these strategies to create, a plethora of more housing. And I think it's really important to keep the environment front of mind and how this, development rights and 100% land coverage and unlimited density and 85-foot height buildings are going to impact the environment. And, TRPA wasn't developed to regulate housing. It was developed to protect the environment. And I think that's a real important, underlying or key issue that needs to be addressed and considered in every aspect of this group. Thank you.
You. Jessica?
There are no other hands raised.
Great, thank you so much. Why don't we go last opportunity for working group members to make a comment on the reports, and then we'll move on to item 9. So go ahead, Mia.
I just have one comment. Mia. I'd like to see if there's the possibility to, perhaps reframe housing, especially certain types of housing, like bonus unit housing, infill housing, workforce housing, as not necessarily being impacts, because they're benefits. And the way that we look in planning world, we only see impacts, so it's only negative. And therefore you must pay for all the damage you're doing to the environment, even though you're doing the very thing, which is getting people out of their cars and letting them walk and making affordable housing so their families can be stable. So how do we, and maybe TRP is gonna be the first in the region, to come up with a way to level the playing field for bonus unit housing, so that we actually see a net benefit, because that means then that many more people are not driving from Sparks. They're now driving, locally. And then we have data, Kings Beach housing, we collected a lot of data when we first got in, people were on average. Most people in Kings Beach were commuting, less than 10 miles to their job. And many of them were living further away, in which the commute was 70 miles. And it's not for everyone, it's not a science, but I think there is a metrics to say that there is a benefit. And it should not be treated as a negative. And I just want to start by saying that if we can begin to not necessarily just call all housing negative impacts, I think that would begin to start the conversation to be that there is bonus unit housing and housing that is actually beneficial to the environment, because it's less VMT, it's less impacts, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that will come out in the EIS. More to come there. Who hasn't had a chance to make a comment that would like to? I think we might be good on item 8. I think in the interest of time, we were thinking about a break here, but are we okay to push forward? And I would just encourage people to be flexible, go ahead and use the restroom, make yourself comfortable. Is that okay, Karen?
Yes, let's continue. We were actually gonna take a break after the next item and as we set up for the interactive item.
Okay, perfect. So let me move us on. Council, are we good with public comment, the way that we did that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna move us on to agenda item 9A. This is cultivating community, conserving the basin vision and outcomes. This item is for discussion and possible action. And I'm gonna turn this over to Eric to present on this item.
All right, Eric Dickovich with Raymond Associates. Good afternoon. You can go to the next slide. My job is to summarize a little bit about the community engagement events that we've done and activities we've done to date, and share some of that information that we received from community members, both in terms of their feedback and as well as who is participating in those events. And the intent here is not to tell you everything that we heard, because those have been summarized for you, they're in your packets, but this is just to give you a high level overview to really lay the foundation for the interactive engagement that we're going to do following this on the proposed project objectives, as well as the key housing issues. So over the course of the fall, we hosted a series of engagement activities. We had in-person workshops here in the Bijou community in South Lake, as well as in Kings Beach, North Lake, in September and October. We hosted and facilitated a simultaneous community survey at the same time that asked very similar questions. In addition to that kind of broader community engagement that we did, we launched that community partner group and had our first meeting in November that Jacob mentioned. And then we also facilitated a series of kind of partner stakeholder meetings with nonprofits, community-based organizations, neighborhood groups, developers, kind of a whole range of different organizations, really with the intent of thinking about what were some of the key issues that we should know about coming into this process, what were some of the ideas people had, linking those key issues to actions that could be taken here regionally to support housing outcomes here in the Tahoe region, and then looking at what some of the potential project objectives we should be looking at for this process moving forward. And then in this and within this process, what are some of the data and informational needs that people are curious about? What should we be looking at to support our decision-making overall? So in each of these meetings, we asked similar sets of engagement. as Karen also mentioned during the community partner meeting, as well as some of those community partners stakeholder meetings, we also asked who should we engage with, how should we engage with people, what were the best methods of engaging and outreaching to community members. So really to build that sort of that foundational pieces of information early on. Next slide. So one of the things we asked in each of those discussions were what some of the key housing needs are. These will be familiar to you all, but we by far heard the lack of affordable and workforce housing, followed by increasing cost of living generally, whether it's rent or mortgage, utilities, insurance. We also heard about concerns around housing security and displacement within the region and access to healthy and sanitary housing overall. Next slide. We, as I mentioned, asked about the intended outcomes. For the most part, participants with the workshops and community meetings were generally supportive of those draft outcomes that we brought to those meetings in general, with broad support for things like reducing displacement, collaborating with communities more closely, and ensuring and encouraging more smaller homes within the region and a range of housing options. We're gonna give you a chance to talk about the revised outcomes at the conclusion of this. So we've taken some of the feedback we got through the community process, updated those project outcomes, and we'll allow you to share your thoughts on those in just a second. Next slide. In addition to asking folks what they liked, we asked folks what was missing with the outcomes. We heard comments about strengthening neighborhoods and community ties, and really connecting the impacts of the housing crisis to more immediate needs like the local economy, community safety, neighborhood vitality. So making those connections more clear for us moving forward. We heard about concerns about addressing climate and natural hazard issues, as well as making sure that all of this conversation was rooted within an environmental context that we've been kind of discussing here today. We heard a lot of support for addressing vulnerable communities or disadvantaged communities within the region, making sure that they have safe and sanitary housing, making sure that there's housing for the workforce, and ensuring that any new housing doesn't create a lot of displacement impacts. We've also heard about building trust and efficiency within the development process to help ensure that projects can move forward more quickly, especially those focused on affordable and workforce housing. So again, we've incorporated that feedback into the revised outcomes that we'll be sharing with you after this for your discussion. The next, you can go to 2 slides, I think. We also asked about people's ideas, right? So this is a generative process. So what is it that you think is important for us to consider through this process? What are the ideas that you have to support better housing outcomes and address the housing crisis within the region? We got a whole wide variety of issues, everything on the development process to policies and regulations to transportation, access related issues, school. We got comments on schools. This is just a selection of a few of those ideas that we heard that were about the development review process and those policies and regulations. Again, there's more of this summarized for you in the packet. And then after the exercise that we're gonna do on those project outcomes, we're gonna have another interactive exercise on some of those housing ideas, what we're missing from that list for us to consider as part of this process, and then some of the priorities you all think from as a working group we should be focusing on in this next phase. So that would be kind of the second interactive exercise that we do. The goal is that is again, it's a generative exercise. Next slide. And then finally, we asked the community members, really, what are some of the data and information needs you'd like to see come out as part of this process to really help us make better decisions about housing and the development rights program within the region. We heard everything from comments about the employment data, the patterns of seasonal employment, household data, housing quality data, climate data, VNT. We heard the whole gamut. So we're gonna be working in different ways to incorporate that feedback through our process. So in our technical analysis in phase 2, we've shared that with all of our technical team, and it's getting woven into the technical analysis that we're doing. There's some housing data that's already been added to the TRPA housing website to support some of these, and some of that data that's already been developed and generated. So we're constantly looking at ways that we can share out this information as we go through the process. So that's just a little bit of the background on what we heard during that engagement process. Again, it's all in your packet for you all if you want to look at the more detailed summaries. With that, I'll hand it over to Karen to kind of go through the project outcomes.
Thank you, Eric. Next slide, please. So these next few slides, this is one of the key discussions and outcomes, outputs that we wanted to get out from this meeting, is really hearing from you on an overarching vision and outcomes for this process. So people have probably been involved in processes where you have really clear goals, and other projects, processes where there aren't clear goals. And we feel like for this one, it's really important that we clearly identify what we're working towards. And so that's what we've been doing with the vision and outcomes. And so, as Eric mentioned, actually, if you could just kind of page through the next few slides, and then we'll come back to this one. You have these in your packet. As Eric mentioned, we've been working on developing, and then you can go back to the first one, thank you. Developing these outcomes through our process, through the community partner group, through the workshops that we've had. We've been kind of vetting these and getting input on them. So these outcomes that you had in your packet and that you see here today are really based on what we have heard from those communities, and we're hoping that they're pretty well honed, but we definitely want to hear today if there's anything else that's missing. And, you know, the idea with these is as we develop policy recommendations, we'll be able to compare them back to these to make sure that we're aligned with what, you know, we as a group, and also then ultimately the governing board kind of approves as our outcomes. So I want to start. I'm just going to go over these kind of high level and then turn it over to Brendan to facilitate a discussion on them. So Jessica, if you can go back to the previous slide on the value or the vision. So I'm going to read this one, and I'm just going to summarize the rest of them. I'm not going to read them all because I know you have them in your packet, and we'll give you a little bit of quiet time to look at these as well. But this vision, we actually, we added this in towards the end based on feedback that we got through the process. So originally we didn't have a vision, we just had the outcomes, but we brought this over from a goal that we had in the very early phases of the Tahoe Living Working Group back in 2020. So this basically is that we should be, through this process, our vision for this process is to adapt TRPA policy, regulation, and programming to facilitate achievement of the overall housing need for the Tahoe Basin, as identified through the assess and generate portion of the process, while achieving and maintaining environmental goals. So this gives us sort of a quantitative vision that we'll be looking at, you know, that there will be during the assess and generate portion. That's where we'll be honing in on kind of what is the overall need that we're looking at. And so that's what we've documented here in this vision. And we'll come back to each of these two. If you could go to the next slide, Jessica. So then we have 4 different project outcome areas. The first one is resilient communities. So just high level, we're looking at directing development into compact, walkable neighborhoods, obviously increasing the availability of affordable and workforce housing, minimizing the risk of natural hazards. Next slide, please. So housing choice, increasing housing choice, providing a range of options, incentivizing smaller homes is something that we heard quite a bit, achieving the different housing types that are identified as part of the housing need, encouraging mixed income rental and for sale housing, and then simplifying the development process. Next slide, please. Foster a strong sense of community and build trust by working with a diversity of community members to build knowledge, trust, and ownership in the planning process. And then finally, equity, center those most impacted by ensuring priority communities have equitable access to quality housing, preserving and improving existing housing for local households, and then minimizing displacement of current residents. So I'm gonna let Brendan facilitate this next element, but what we wanted to hear from you mainly today is anything missing from this? And as you think through the different housing solutions that you've thought of, how do they align with these outcomes and vision? You know, can they be achieved under these? Do we need to add or change something?
Okay, great, thanks, Eric and Karen. Well, as Karen said, it's our turn to tell the team how we think they're doing. What are they missing? We can do a little wordsmithing, we can talk bigger picture concepts, but we want to make sure going forward we have the right vision, the right foundation, so.
This is me again, and everyone else chime in, I don't wanna be, I just go quickly throw out my ideas. What I wrote down is remove barriers and level the playing field. So I think incentivizing is really different than removing a barrier. One, that means you identify what the barrier is and then you remove it. And so I think that goes back to the autopsy approach. So I think it should be part of a mission statement to really go and hone and figure out what those real barriers are and what's preventing the outcomes we want. And I think it really also comes down to level the playing field. If it's zone higher density housing, you should be able to build higher density housing without having to prove, another EIR. So I mean, how do you level the playing field so you get the housing? And then I think I have to say this, there's nothing about money in here. Costs are a major factor. You can't just want the housing to emerge. You have to find a way to fund it. So if you don't put the equation of money up here at all, then it's really just policy without any financing behind it. So you just can't get to that deeper subsidy period without any sort of financial support. The other thing I want to say is smaller units and equivalencies. So one of the things I find very fascinating about Tahoe is that, most of the housing stock, or a lot of the housing stock we have today are motel rooms, that have kitchenettes, that are permanent housing for a lot of folks, and those are like 300 square feet. Tiny homes now, ADUs are 300 square feet. So we're kind of moving back in a weird way to kind of where we were, but it also, small is elegant, small is cheaper. But then when you do the per unit cost, no way will you ever be able to afford something small, elegant, and efficient under the rubric that's here, unless you come up with equivalencies. So one residential unit of use, there is absolutely no limit. So 10,000, 20,000 square foot, if you're a billionaire, you just write a check. If you're building one apartment that's 300 square feet, you're still getting that one unit. So is there a way to, and then all your fees get assessed based on that one unit. So maybe if you're doing tiny homes, maybe there's an equivalency. So maybe average unit size is 3,000 square feet. And if you could put 6 units in 3,000 square feet, then you're charged as 1 unit, not 6 units. Just putting out ideas. You have to really think differently about how you're gonna present infill housing if you're gonna level the playing field.
Lots of good ideas. Jessica?
I'm gonna second what Mia said, and because a lot of this for the outcomes is there's no numbers tied to any of it. And I know, like, for the city, we constantly have to say, how many units are we producing? What's going on? How many times are we meeting with some of these communities? All of that sort of stuff. And so I know that one of the things we talked about early on was around streamlining permitting. And there's none of these outcomes that really directly relate to that, and as far as the numbers, so it's like promoting a range of housing, but that's not actually how many houses are being developed or rehabilitated to be quality housing. So I would just add something around numbers to the outcomes to this.
Can I just ask, so that is what we were trying to do with the vision? Excuse me, so I guess I want to ask you if the vision is specific enough. And I get that we haven't given you a ton of information about what the overall housing need will be through the assess and generate portion of the project, but there are multiple housing needs studies out there, and through the assess and generate portion of the project, we are planning to kind of identify what the universe is of, the gap in housing that we need. And so that would be sort of a high level number that we'd be aiming towards. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about something more specific?
No, I think that would be helpful. I think it'd be more specific to each one of those, but going into the vision, I think understanding housing needs a little bit different. I think I forget which item we already went over. One of the issues we see as well is there's not a lot of understanding about what kind of housing is being developed within each jurisdiction, right? And so prior to this meeting, I was just pulling some numbers, and the city is generated over 600 units of affordable housing. Mia's project is 77 units, and that's the only other affordable project that we see in the region. So it's like, how are we understanding where housing is being developed and what types? So that's, I think, as important as understanding what the overall needs are, because some of the studies that do exist 5 years ago are pretty outdated at this point.
So as part of this quantifying, which local jurisdictions have done what and kind of where we're at today?
Correct.
Thanks, Jessica. Sophia?
Sophia Hedrick. I actually also echo some sort of outcome related to providing funding. I think a lot of these projects simply, it's just really tough for them to pencil out. And so I think if there was some sort of mechanism, this idea is for the TRPA to be a grantor and to provide, mini grants to projects that are meeting all the goals that people want to see in the region. I think that would be a great idea, or even, helping to form some sort of housing trust that manages those kinds of grants. I think a funding mechanism to help support this kind of housing could be a really important and viable option, something to think about. Another piece, I know a lot of the feedback circulated around minimizing STRs or incentivizing homes to rent their vacant homes to to locals and things along those lines. There, to me, are some vision items and here are outcome items that sort of circulate around that, kind of get to it, but nothing is like.
Right now. Lyon County, Nevada.
Hey, that's good. I like that a lot.
You said this,
I should make your comments.
But no, it's something that kind of hits on it a little bit, like more directly. There's one that I'd like to hear about creating communities where people live and work, but also like creating vibrant communities full of houses that are occupied. Like, I don't know if there's a way to say that, that's not saying exactly what the outcome has to, or what the mechanism is for accomplishing the outcome, but just something more, we want to see more of the houses that we have lived in.
Thanks, Sophia. Who else has a comment that hasn't chimed in yet?
I just have a question. Was there demographic data available on these community groups to know like how many were homeowners, how many were renters, or anything like that?
Those who were involved in the community engagement process
Yeah.
or more generally in the region?
In the community engagement process.
Yeah, so we actually had very detailed demographic information. I think it was in one of James' slides. It didn't get, I think it was up there at the end, where each meeting we have demographics of who participates. So their demographic characteristics, housing characteristics, as well as socioeconomic. We haven't published all that information, but we do have that associated with the work. In each of those 2 community meetings plus the community survey, we did get at least 30% participation from members who lived in the community priority zones and who were self-identified as one of those priority communities.
Yeah, so I have a comment on workforce homeownership opportunities. I've heard said about those, I personally have been one of those, and I'm an advocate for those. And also, concerned about the deed restrictions that oftentimes come with those, and would recommend revisiting those deed restrictions. Oftentimes those are really onerous, condescending, unnecessary, and really unattractive to potential first-time home buyers, and I think can cause sometimes those programs to fail.
So can I just clarify, are you saying look for homeownership opportunities that are not deed restricted?
Or with more thoughtful restrictions that are more equitable.
Okay, deed restrictions, good, Vince?
Yeah, I think you guys did a great job summarizing this and creating a mission statement. That's usually a revision. That's always the hardest part of anything. Is usually getting that. I wanted to add something, or see if we wanted to add something to it, which was also that these changes produce the types of communities that we want. We talk about, you mention it in here, you know, the sub areas, but not in the mission statement. I think in addition to providing the housing that we want for a broad range of people and improving the environment, we also want to create the types of communities we'd like to see up here. We were built, you know, over the last 100 years with the worst land use planning period in history, and I think we need to retrofit back to get something that is more like we'd like to see. So I don't know if you want to add that to that mission statement, but I think that's an important component of what we're trying to do with the redevelopment. We're going to be trying to incentivize.
Thank you for that comment. We were thinking that we could look back in the regional plan itself for some of that visioning and the mission, and tie this, even though this is specific for this process, tie it back to some of those original or more recent visioning statements.
Or, yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I mean, to kind of echo something that maybe Mia said a bit ago, but put it more cleanly, is that we want to protect the lake, and there's gravity. Everything else is like man-made, right? Like all the rules and everything is just fabricated over time to respond to something. So the goal is housing. How do we get there? What's the shortest way to get to housing while respecting gravity and the lake and the environment? So, you know, how do we streamline things? The process is pretty complicated. At the end of the day, I don't think that anybody looking for workforce housing cares about hydrological zones, and if you can transfer from this zone to that zone. They just want a house. They want to live the American dream, and that's what they want. And they want to get here, be able to rent, and then eventually buy a home. So how do we make that process easier?
Jessica?
I just had a quick question on the developer feedback. So I was looking at the list of who was interviewed for the housing issues and outcomes and the barriers. And I think for this, it would be helpful to know, like, because I know one of them were live units in Truckee, which is outside of the basin. And so how many of these groups have actually developed or attempted to develop within the Tahoe Basin? Because I think that could skew some of that data that people are intaking with what's actually put on the ground here already.
Okay, and I can also look back. I think in the summary, we did have the names of the developers that were interviewed, but so are you saying that you do see them or you don't?
No, I'm just saying for some of these groups, I'm not sure that some of them have actually done any development here.
Oh, okay. I need to look back at that. I was under the, when I looked at the group, that didn't jump out at me, but I can look again and I can email you back. My impression was that they were mostly the developers that we've been kind of working with. Like I know Rob was on that group and some of the people that you see at the meetings frequently.
Yeah, just because I know that I get a lot of calls from different types of developers that are interested in developing in Tahoe. And they're interested and understand some of the processes, but aren't actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
They're not brave enough.
Because they don't want to touch it.
Not brave enough. Yeah.
Let me just add one point. The thing I also see that I think TRPA could be a leader on, some of the other things that make housing, the only way you're gonna get housing done is utilities, right? So infrastructure, getting units of use, getting sewer units. I mean, I know TRPA doesn't control these things, but maybe there's a leadership model. Maybe there's a, let's all just row in the same direction. Let's not make it so onerous for every single development because it's a priority, or because it's bonus units, or because, you know, as Jessica knows, most developers who maybe just, you know, imagine what they could do here have no idea that you've got to go to all these different agencies and beg for something that's a commodity. And people don't even understand what a commodity is. Because nobody develops like this anywhere in California or in Nevada. So we have a very rare situation set up that's almost like a trading commodity situation, and it's all about who you know. And if you have infill doing the same things of having to beg market rate developers for, oh, I know you're sitting on these 12 sewer units, how much can I buy them from? I mean, you should not have, us regular people should not have to be in that trading game. Like, we need to just go to the agency and say, please, let us build this, you're exempt. Like, and I'll just say it, the biggest thing that TRPA can do to support, because, I know you're not gonna get a big giant cash infusion to loan every developer who wants to build some large amounts of money. But I think there are things in terms of fees, coverage, the water quality fees, all these things that TRPA could control by either assessing it differently, whether it's the equivalency thing, or, and then also getting, and if you walk the walk, make everyone else follow your walk. Like if you're gonna say, this is so important to us because we want to build these types of communities, then we're gonna exempt this person from having to get the coverage, pay all the fees and do all these things. And that's how we're gonna save this project money and create the certainty that they need. So putting that out there, that's the dream.
And if you don't wanna get rid of commodities, and that's just how the game works, why don't you give commodities to those that build housing for workforce housing? Say, you're getting so many extra bonus points that you can then sell to someone to build a 10,000 square foot lakefront.
This may be premature in the presentation for feedback. It may tie to the next item more closely. But in my mind, the two ways to make housing cheaper and easier to build is, yes, the development rights system is a huge platform to, address. But the other one is the entitlements, which triggers environmental review, which triggers years and millions of dollars. And so having just been through the previous phase of this type of work, I think partnering closely with the different jurisdictions around the lake, I'm just looking through some of the items and suggestions, those have to do with the area plans. And so just working closely with the jurisdictions on any potential changes to area plans, if that is where this group goes forward, I think would be really important to consider. Not that it's not a good area to target, but that it brings its own timelines and complications.
It does. So next item is on ideas. This is vision and outcomes, just to keep us high level. Jessica, why don't we ask working group members online on Zoom if they have any comments or questions? Go ahead and raise your hand.
Any working group members online have any comments or questions? Go ahead and raise your hand now. There are no hands raised.
That's okay. Any final thoughts before we take public comment, Gavin?
Yeah, thank you, Gavin. Lead City Tahoe. A little bit broken record for the last two phases, but so sorry for everybody that's been through those. But the outcomes, what we want to see are very important, but I would advocate for outcomes that also address what we don't necessarily want to see. A lot of this money, a lot of the issue with money is that you can make, just a developer can make a lot more money doing anything except for affordable housing. So so maybe we need to have, some disincentives in here too, and we do get into the housing ideas, so hopefully this dovetail as well, but maybe having some actual outcomes around what we don't like to see as much could also be really helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting. Ina, you good?
I'm listening, oh, sorry. I'm listening and learning, and I won't speak at the.
Okay. Well, just let me know when you want to. Okay, I'm not seeing any other red lights, so I'm gonna open this up to public comment. So members of the public who would like to speak on item 9A, this is your opportunity. I'll first go to members in the room, ask you to come up to the podium, state your name. And then we'll go to members of the public who are on Zoom. You can go ahead and raise your hand or dial *9 on your telephone and we'll unmute you. So any public comment in the room, please come on up to the podium. Seeing none. Jessica, I'll go to you for members of the public online.
Any member of the public would like to address the working group, please raise your hand now and you will be called on. There are no hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Final thoughts on vision outcomes before we go to ideas? No. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna move us to ideas. Yes. Okay, this is 9B. This is also for discussion. And wait, do we need, was there an action? item?
Oh, we can't, should we take an action, Marcia? We have an action, but I'm gonna let Marcia weigh in as to whether we actually.
Well, what I can tell you is this, you followed the public process appropriately so that you can take action if you choose to do that. And I don't know if you were planning to ask for an approval of the vision statement or what the action item would be. But you can take action, you can provide direction, may come back with, you know, some kind of a revision, or you can leave it at this.
We do have a motion, Jessica, if you want to advance the slides to just a little bit next. This is just a motion to give staff direction to present the draft vision and outcomes as shown in attachment A of the staff report and the feedback received today to the Regional Planning Commission. So it's basically just sort of confirming that we had this meeting today. I don't think that we really need to take this motion to see. So John, do you want to wait?
Mr. Chairman, if you do take the motion, could you change it to the Regional Planning Committee and or Governing Board? Because we may go straight to the Governing Board.
I can absolutely do that. Karen, do you, whatever staff would direct us to do, we're happy to do if the conversation satisfies your need or if you need a formal motion.
Why don't we take a motion, and I think it does not need to be a roll call vote. We can just say aye, is that correct?
Ideally, we would take a roll call vote. I know we've had trouble with roll call today, online, but it sounds like there are just 2 working group members online.
Why don't we, if I may, I think we don't need to take a vote on this. I think this is a little bit perfunctory, and I would rather get us into the next agenda item. That's okay.
Here. I like that. Motion to not take a motion. You know, I think it sounded like we had good support and we have concrete feedback on vision outcome. So, if you're comfortable, I'm comfortable.
Yes, and we'll keep the working group apprised, like we'll amend these and we will keep you apprised when we put this in the packet to go to the governing board, so you have another opportunity to see it again.
Perfect. Do we need a break, Eric? Or are you gonna catch up? Are you gonna be good by the time I get this read?
I'll be good.
He's good. Here we go. So item 9B, we're gonna stretch a little. This is on ideas. And we'll have a discussion. There may be an outcome here. I guess we can talk about that.
Sorry, talk about what?
If we're gonna do, action on this item.
Okay, right, I think it'll be kind of the same as the last item, but yeah, we probably don't actually need to take action.
Okay, so Eric is gonna facilitate this. We're gonna do some group stations. As you can see, there's some setup going on. We'll invite the public who is present to join with us. So feel free to stand up and join us. And I'm gonna turn this over to Eric as he perfectly sits down.
You did a very nice job installing for me, and while folks get the station set up. So here's what we're gonna do for the next little bit of time. We have, through the community process, pulled together a series of different housing ideas. Some of them big, some of them small, some of them all in between. So what we have on the boards are a synthesis of those particular ideas. What we want you to do today is really tell us what's missing from those. Tell us, and then we're gonna ask you what your priorities are on those boards. So we have 3 boards focused on those particular housing actions. We have another board focused specifically on those educational topics that we talked about, those sort of 101 trainings that we also want to get your feedback on. this afternoon. So what I'm gonna do is split you all into 4 different groups. And we're gonna circulate, you'll have about 3 minutes, 4 minutes at each station. They're pretty straightforward and simple. But again, what we want you to do at that station is to write down on these sticky notes, ideas that might be missing. Or ones that, if you feel like it's not well articulated, you wanna articulate it more. Again, these are summaries and there's more information in your packet, so we can try to simplify it and distill down some of those. You won't see all.
The weather was on, it wasn't like they're not TV, it's just the weather.
There's someone who is online, who's unmuted, if you can mute yourself.
Appreciate that. Cold tomorrow.
You is I'm gonna walk around and I'm gonna give you all some sticky notes. And then I'm gonna count you out, and then you're gonna go to each of the stations around there. Again, I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes at each station, and then I'm gonna make you all move around the room to the next station overall. And then at the conclusion, after that time is up, I'm gonna give you 3 minutes to go around and prioritize with some dots at the very end. So this is gonna be about 20 minutes or so kind of exercise. And then at each station, there'll be a staff member, we'll do a quick report out, and then we'll get any commission or working group comments from that.
Can I just add, Kaylee will be facilitating the group that's on Zoom, so you guys will get to participate too.
Can I ask a quick question? I actually took notes in ours because a lot of these things, like our jurisdiction is already implementing, so wouldn't necessarily be a priority for us. Do you want us to put that in the notes somewhere as well? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so starting here, so start off with 1, and we're gonna count around to 4, and then we're gonna start up.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so 1s go here, 2s go here, 3s go here, and then 4s go here. Remember.
Their ears are really.
Yeah. With the ideas
Or we want to change.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Kaylee, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Jessica, could you mute the in-person?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for your patience. So in person, we are running like 4 different stations. And so we're just gonna do the same boards with the same information, just online.
Great.
But I don't have access. Let me just share my own screen. Hi. I'm running. It's okay. Okay. So, okay. So for our discussion, the first thing that we're going to be talking about is the development process. So these are some of the, well, actually, these are all of the points that we got from community members during our workshops, as we mentioned, from our community partner groups. This is all condensed into this. And so what we would like to know is there anything from this that you particularly like, anything that you want to add that you think is missing? And then are there any ideas that you want to explore in this upcoming phase, or that you want us to explore in this upcoming phase? And these are going to be the same questions we're going to ask you in the next three slides. So same questions, but different topics. If you want, you can say it out loud. I can jot it down, or you can put it in the chat.
Not sure if you, I'll just go ahead and throw out a few things if that works.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. So I think that these all are great ideas. I think that maybe as it relates to the streamlining of the permitting process, perhaps this might fall under the creating of a joint team of housing and land use staff. I think part of the challenge is that in the basin, the Tahoe Regional, the TRPA has MOUs with different jurisdictions that authorize those jurisdictions to review permit applications, or to essentially take on some responsibilities that would typically be TRPAs. So what that's done is created a situation where not every jurisdiction in the basin has the same sort of agreement with the TRPA. And so that means you have different processes for getting a permit, depending on where you are within the basin. If you're within Placer County, they operate with an MOU with TRPA. And so Placer County does certain things on behalf of TRPA that on the Nevada side of the Tahoe Basin may not be the case. And so I think that, you know, whether it's developing a team or developing resources that are sort of generic, but then unique or customized for the region or the jurisdiction where somebody is developing a project, could be helpful. And I don't know where that should be captured, but that's just one thing that we're finding at the hub when we work with homeowners who are trying to develop in Placer County and working through TRPA. The permit application that they have, or right now, is generic so that it can really serve all jurisdictions. But because of that, there's some redundancy in what someone would submit to TRPA versus what they would then turn around and submit to Placer County because of that MOU. So just something I wanted to note, and some sort of nuance maybe that could get built in here somehow.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Anyone else have thoughts, questions, comments?
Quick comment, the process you have up here, it kind of all addresses just like timing and timeline. Is that correct? Is there something else that would address like cost and fees too, for especially?
Yeah, so that's another one of our boards, yeah.
Okay.
This is just, yeah, processes, timelines, how do we get to where we want to get?
Yeah, I think generally shortening it, yeah, is probably what everybody wants.
For sure, yeah.
One other thing I'd note, sorry, I can't help stop talking about others, but you've got provide a one-stop shop information resource, provide information to local developers. I think that we need to be more specific somehow in terms of who the audience is, because historically workforce housing was in fact developed by quote unquote developers who were sort of working behind a corporate structure, an LLC of sorts. But you do now have, particularly with the introduction of ADUs, homeowners who are not developers, who are creating housing products for our region. And so I think when you're thinking about communication and resources, it's not just developers who are typically people, obviously, that have this experience, understand code, understand permit applications, but homeowners typically do not, unless they, of course, have developed a project themselves, which many haven't. So I think, it's aggregated under local developers, but I think in terms of how you think about moving forward, designing incentives, all the rest, thinking about who the applicant is, not just that they're a developer, but they could be a homeowner who's essentially a sole proprietor, who has a very different risk profile than somebody who's applying for a development right, who represents a corporation, for example, is something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So yeah, just a reminder, these are not necessarily our comments. These are comments that we heard from other people.
Totally. And sorry if my comments made it seem
No,
like
no.
I'm directing them, like you came up with them. I just think, given what I'm reading, this is
Mhm.
just something that might be worth bringing forward to the full group for more detailed discussion.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a very valid point. We're gonna move on to the next one. These are much more detailed policies and more of that regulation. This is where, finances, I guess, would come into play. And same thing for this, anything that you are particularly interested in, anything that you want to add, or additional ideas.
The only thing I would add is, I noticed transportation, proximity to transit is included in here in terms of zoning and where you might allow things. I'm wondering how microtransit on-demand service may be changing that a little bit. So it's more of a question mark or a question than a comment, I suppose, but something to think about. Because currently the TRPA's bonus unit boundary to an extent is defined on a lot's proximity to a public transit stop, which makes total sense. But with on-demand transit now, first and last mile, free transit to the community, does that change things at all? And I think it's just a question worth asking.
Yeah, I think for our purposes, it does not change it. I think, yeah, they're mostly like bus stop locations. Yeah, only increases accessibility.
Right. I suppose the question I'm posing though is, should we be evaluating the
that?
criteria for the bonus unit boundary and taking into account on-demand public transit service and not just the location of transportation stops?
Right.
And I don't have the answer to that. I'm sure we on this call could all debate whether that's a good idea or not, but I do think it's, when I read this, it doesn't capture that. So it's just another sort of comment or question for the committee to consider.
Yeah.
I also think that, I'm just pausing in case others want to say something, but I've heard talk about an idea of potentially allowing smaller middle housing type development, so ADUs, tiny homes, where they would have to acquire a portion of a development right, not the full development right. So the whole development right system would be modified. I see here it says that maybe they wouldn't need it, which is a pretty significant change. And I, of course, would see the benefit of that. But if there's pushback on that, maybe considering, portions of a development right as opposed to the entire development right for smaller type projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just comment. I like the ideas of quadplexes, triplexes on larger lots outside of town centers. I think that's a really good opportunity to like get some multifamily style or just variety of housing in. Because I mean, from what I've seen, there's a lot. I mean, there may be a lot of potential properties that could also convert if they wanted to like
Mhm.
and that kind of it kind of helps with the parking issue too, because when a lot of, if you're trying to go really big and tall and high up, and get a lot of units, like you're always left with that parking issue. And it could just like, it just causes more trouble, especially in the winter. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I like that idea. I think that's really smart.
And yeah, you don't need to raise your hand. You could just speak freely. Christina, if you have something.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about removing the coverage requirement, reducing coverage requirements. I mean, that is in place because of the fragile soils we have in the Tahoe Basin and the propensity for increased runoff when there's more than the land capability of allows, more coverage than the land capability allows. So that would definitely seem to be a red flag in the environmental sense. And I don't know how you get around that. I mean, I don't understand how you can go from, 50 years of requiring compliance with land capability standards, and then all of a sudden say, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. Well, isn't that going to have a direct impact on the lake and the water quality? And I don't know how you can mitigate something like that. And I am totally against that. I just want to go on the record saying that. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I guess just to answer a portion of that, a lot of these projects that would go through these 100% deed restricted affordable workforce housing projects, a requirement is for stormwater systems to be in place, that green infrastructure to be in place. That is an extra requirement for those projects. Not saying that is fully mitigating the coverage of that development, but that is a portion and a requirement. There are also initiatives outside of the long range planning department that are focused on that stormwater infrastructure to be developed neighborhood wide rather than project based. So those are different. There's a lot of moving parts, I guess. So not necessarily a black and white issue. And a lot of effort is being done to mitigate as much as more developments come up.
Well, I think that raises a big important point that Christina was bringing up around coverage, and I hear those concerns loud and clear, and I wonder if there's opportunity to make a connection between what you just said in terms of efforts to try to mitigate those types of impacts, in addition to if you're going to propose or going to consider reducing coverage requirements, how are you offsetting that? Sometimes I think these conversations that we all have happen, I wouldn't say silos, but they become hyper-focused on the topic at hand, housing, for example, but we're not connecting housing to other environmental efforts, other work that's taking place. So are there ways to increase or improve some of the stormwater work that's happening in a bigger way if we thought that in exchange for that, we might be able to develop some additional middle housing, for example? And I don't know the answer to that either, but it just seems like an opportunity for broadening our awareness of things and sort of spanning the conversation in certain categories where it might make sense to help us make more, or I guess the committee to make more informed recommendations, especially if you all are really looking at stormwater, neighborhood-based stormwater treatments and what those look like and timelines and everything else. What does that do to the conversation around coverage?
Any other comments before I move on to the next one? No? Okay. The last one are housing programs and partnerships. These are kind of ideas that we pulled obviously from the public on how we should go about not just producing affordable housing, but also, working collaboratively with other groups that are already in the works of doing this. So any comments there?
Well, what about Nevada? You say CTC to donate land, but there's also, I think you should add Nevada state lands to that, because this is basin wide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great point, Christina, and I think there may be others as well. It's not just Conservancy, not just Nevada lands, like, we get calls from members of the community who have land, they're willing to donate as well, but they don't know where to send it. So I think that, really there are a variety of stakeholders and partner groups that could be considered to receive the land. And it could be that the people, the entities or the individuals providing the land are far more diverse than the Conservancy, or even the Nevada Land Trust. So something to think about.
Also, I think you should consider having employers provide employee housing. I
Yes.
mean, like that, it seems to be a no-brainer. Like when Kirkwood was developed, they had this huge employee housing construction as part of their initial project. And it was very helpful in providing housing for employees. And, you don't see that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll just mention with the first one, the CTC donating land. There might be a lot of hurdles with that one too, since it is a state agency. And a gift of public funds. I guess that would fall under a gift of public funds if the land was to be donated. But I know there might be other creative ways of doing that with the local jurisdictions taking ownership. So maybe that as well, maybe adding in partnership with local jurisdictions or something to that effect. But donating just plain out or just straight up donating is something that a state agency wouldn't be able to do.
But they can sell it for $1.
Yeah, they can.
That's what happened with, the Sugar Pine Village. That was all Conservancy land and
Yeah,
community.
true. But yeah, the property actually was donated, I think, or it transferred to HCD, if I'm not mistaken. And they carried out that transaction, but I know there's creative ways of doing it, so I won't say it's impossible or anything.
Okay. And then for the last one, this one's a little bit more different. So like we mentioned, we want to produce these educational sessions, as many organizations across the basin are doing as well. And these are just some of the ideas that we pulled together from our staff, but also from our workshops. So what types of topics do you think the public needs to hear from TRPA about? But also, jurisdictional staff, like just across the board. What types of information do we need to be sharing? And is there anything that you would, want to add? And if you could also prioritize some of these as well. We're trying to rank them.
He's wrapping up in there. Would growth management include development rights, education?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important, and also coming up with a better way to communicate what development rights are. We're at the hub, we're throwing around different analogies that could be used to make sense of PRUs and residential allocations and RUU, like the language just doesn't translate easily into something that makes sense for most people. And so I think that needs to happen as well, which could help with some of these educational sessions, I suppose, step in that direction. And then I also think whether this education or not, but the discussion around area median income requirements and deed restrictions and local worker versus income restricted housing, I think speaking, maybe that falls under innovations and deed restrictions, but I think, you know, really having that conversation around local housing versus that's deed restricted versus housing that is restricted by area median income could be helpful. You know, AMI is something that is a challenge in our region in part because the countywide AMI numbers typically do not reflect the local numbers that we have, which makes matching potential tenants to income restricted units a challenge at times. And so where that may fall into the education or discussions, I'm not entirely sure, but I think AMI should be included somehow and somewhere in some of these educational sessions.
Okay.
And if they should be in Spanish as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, I am gonna wrap this up because we will be heading into the main room again. Okay, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is like, is there a way to take existing housing that people participate in? Okay, so I'm gonna go to you, okay, we'll do inside house, so we make it really easy for someone to split that into any duplex.
But also it has to be the
Projects going on.
That's right. So the more work. We can get some, get folks to wrap up and find their seats. That'd be great. We're pushing up on 4:00.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do, once everyone gets to their seats, there is a staff facilitator at each of the 4 stations, I'm gonna give them 15-20 seconds to summarize what they heard at their station and some of the ideas that were added to their boards. We're gonna get it quickly, because I know we're gonna push the board, there's a few more agenda items, so very quickly with that, if everyone could just wrap up their sidebar conversations, so it's here for the people who are on Zoom here. So with that, Karen, you're standing here first, and then I'll call on Alyssa, Michelle, and then Jacob to just get 15-20 seconds to summarize a little bit about what you heard or what were the priorities at your station. So Karen first.
Thank you. I'm just gonna highlight a few things that we heard. Definitely people were in favor of having developer 101, planner 101 trainings, or planning 101 trainings to just end the history, kind of how did we get here today? Also some suggestions to understand what each of the local jurisdictions are already doing and what housing is available in those areas. And then some suggestions for combining some of these. So parking fundamentals could probably be combined with workforce housing economics, and planning and zoning for workforce housing. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Karen. How about Alyssa? Can you go next? Thanks.
This group was focused on what are we missing from our policies and development regulation ideas. I would say there are a lot of great ideas, but the 3 top things were 1, scalable development rights. So meaning we take like the average square foot of a single family home, that becomes 1 development right. And then maybe a quarter of that square footage then become maybe a quarter of a development right. Like that kind of approach. The second thing that was brought up a lot was coverage. Again, how do we make it, we made some changes with phase 2, but how do we make it just more feasible to build higher density housing in our town centers? And then the third was really around the process streamlining, streamlining the process for building or for retrofitting and remodeling small homes, especially in the South Shore. And primarily for people with small homeowners who maybe don't have a lot of money or time to go through that process. And then all the way through like streamlining any changes that we make with, doing that at the same time as local jurisdictions are amending their area plans. Lots of good ideas.
Thanks, Alyssa. Michelle, how about you?
Hey, everybody, can you hear me okay?
Turn the mic on.
I have the housing programs and partnerships, so a lot of good ideas fleshed out here and certainly a lot of additional backing to some of the ideas behind it. I would say there's probably 3 big themes here with funding sources, having some kind of permanent funding sources to help with whether it's self-help, rehabilitation, rental owner, a lot of the existing housing stock, the housing is expensive to get into already. And then you're bound with this upfront cost of just getting it into a livable state because it's so run down. And so having some kind of program in place for rehabilitation or lenders programs, some grant funding, federal grant or what have you to help with any of this kind of existing housing stock that's needing some help just to even get into, let alone being able to afford some rents. So funding was a big theme throughout this. Then taking some of our existing housing stock, whether it's a house making it into just built in a way to make it into like a 4-plex, or taking some other larger buildings and dividing them out into multiple units so that we're not increasing our coverage or, taking the footprint and making it larger in any way, shape, maybe going up a story. some other ideas along those same lines of additional housing would be ADUs, but having more incentives for homeowners who want to do ADUs and have them available as rental units. We do already have something in place with deed restriction bonus unit program, but this is additional to that, some additional incentives for homeowners who want to make ADUs on their property more accessible. And then after discussing funding and all these other inventory type of situations and roles and responsibilities came up quite a bit, like, you know, where does TRPA fall in? Where does the local jurisdiction fall in? How does this play out? And the need for a regional or basin-wide housing authority was probably triple checked on this board as a huge interest to make all this happen and we have that one stage for things to fall into and play out for these things to happen, to be able to manage funding and all the needs on the local levels.
Thanks, Michelle. Jacob, you're the last one in here, and then I'll have Kaylee just very quickly to online.
Okay, so I had the group development processes, so we talked about how to make our development processes work better for the type of housing we need. And one thing that kept coming up among the groups is, could we just lay out what we want? What are the types of projects that we need to meet our environmental goals and our housing goals, and make those a ministerial approval, so make it easier for projects that we want to get approved. And that was really the big takeaway from this one.
Thanks, Jacob. Kaylee.
Hi, everyone. So on the online group, we did all 4 boards, as you guys did. And so for the first one, the development processes, Erin mentioned that the fact that jurisdictions don't have this, each jurisdiction doesn't have the same process, kind of relationship between TRPA, between them and TRPA, kind of creates this challenge for them to get work done. Also providing education, not necessarily just to developers, but identifying who is that audience really, and how that communication is different between different applicants. For the TRPA policy and regulations, we talked about how bonus unit boundaries, they're determined by proximity to transit. How is that, how can that shift based on micro transit possibly? Also the idea of like quads and triplexes outside of town centers is a really great idea, and also how potential properties can be converted like by homeowners. For the third one, for housing programs, we talked about how employers should be providing this land for employee housing. And then finally, we talked about further learning, especially on growth management, but also talking about AMIs and how deed restrictions work into that, and the difference between, you know, AMIs and deed restrictions, and also providing these educational programs also in Spanish. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Kaylee. Really appreciate that. And just so everyone knows, not everyone can see all the sticky notes or hear all the online comments. That'll be part of the record. We'll incorporate those into the minutes so that those go out, so you can read those specifically after this meeting is over. So just thanks everyone for their participation. Right?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Thanks all. Felt good to get up, talk to each other. And I think we're done with that item. There's gonna be no action. We're not voting, so thank you all. We'll see the summary in the minutes. And
Were you gonna just ask if there is any more public comment though, just officially?
sure.
Yeah.
I was definitely planning to do that. Is there any more public comment? I'll just go first in the room. Think you were able to express yourselves. Is Jessica allowed to make a comment as a working group member? Sure. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Jessica.
I was just wondering, because when I went through this housing ideas and topics for further learning, obviously the Tahoe Living Working Group has been meeting for 3 years now, but none of the things that we brought up in the past were part of this, really. And so if you could integrate that in some way,
Okay, and none of the things you brought up in the past were part of topics for further learning or?
For the
any-
housing ideas.
Oh, okay, we did, okay, yes. We a little bit focused on what we heard in the workshops, but we do have all of those ideas. So we will make sure that those ideas that you guys brought up in previous meetings are incorporated into our ultimate list of ideas that will then go into the next phase for distillation and more input from everyone.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. How about, members of the public online that would like to comment on item 9B? Now is your opportunity.
If any members of the public would like to comment on this item, please raise your hand now by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 if you've joined by phone. There are no hands raised to comment.
Okay, thank you very much. So I know we're past time, but there's a couple quick business items. It would be wonderful if we could get done. Is everyone okay to spend another 5 or 10 minutes here? Okay, let's do these quickly and then we're gonna. Gavin's gotta go. Okay, understood. If some of you need to leave, we understand. Be great to get a couple business items done and then a final public comment period will happen. So let's go to item 11. This is gonna be electing a vice chair, just in case I cannot attend a meeting. It's always nice on a group to have a vice chair. I actually have someone in mind that I'm gonna nominate, which would be Emily Setzer from Placer County. She has, we talked offline, she's willing to take on a vice chair role. But I do want to provide and open this up as an opportunity to all working group members to either self-nominate or nominate someone else if you're choosing to be a vice chair for this committee. So go ahead, don't be shy, and nominate yourself if you'd like. We're also going to look to our online members.
I won't be offended.
Any members online who would like to submit a nomination for vice chair, please do so now. I will unmute you if you raise your hand. Nobody's raising their hand.
Yeah, you have something to say?
I was just gonna support your recommendation, Chair, for Emily. I think she'd be an excellent vice chair.
Is that a motion?
I third the motion.
We got a first and a second on the motion. Okay. All those in favor, please say aye on the motion to have Emily Setzer as vice chair. Any opposed or any abstentions?
I'll abstain.
I voted aye too. Fantastic. Emily Setzer is our vice chair. Thank you, Emily. Quickly on the minutes. There was a set of minutes from our last meeting. This is item 12 in our packets. Believe it or not, our last meeting was April 21st, 2023. That was a long time ago. Those minutes were also posted on the webpage. Were there any comments, questions, clarifications needed on the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as they were posted.
Second, so moved.
Yeah, I'm gonna push you as making the motion to approve them.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Anyone?
I'll second it.
Jessica second, thank you. So all those in favor of the minutes as posted, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions or objections?
I'll abstain.
Abstain?
Eat Mountain Valley View.
Oh, let's just get the abstentions. So Sophia, Rob, Enod, and online.
I think that was a mistaken unmuting.
Okay. So 3 abstentions. So that motion passes. Thank you all for bearing with me. We have one final item here for business before we take public comment. I'm gonna turn it over to Eric. This is on our meeting evaluation, and I believe we have a QR code to click on.
If you could go ahead a few slides to this section, so just quickly, next steps and meeting evaluation. Jacob kind of went over what's happening in the process, moving forward. If you could go ahead a few more slides. We are gonna be, we have started kicking off our technical analysis, for our team, so we have a series of, particular, technical work that we're doing, so feedback that we've got on data needs, policy ideas, and so forth, we're integrated into that work.
Sorry.
Phil, can you go back one slide? Yeah, there you go. And then as we mentioned, as Jacob mentioned earlier, we're gonna initiate the CEQA streamlining plan. with the goal of really developing some of our initial policy ideas and recommendations in kind of the spring of 2025, and then starting our round 2 of community engagement with the broader community in that timeframe. Next slide. One of the things that we're doing as part of this process in our meetings is doing meeting evaluations for all of our meetings, whether they're the community partner groups or otherwise. We'd all like you, it should only take maybe 3 minutes to complete this meeting evaluation. So there's a SurveyMonkey link on the screen, or you can just snap a QR code, it'll take you right to the survey. We also encourage members of the public to take the survey as well. There's gonna be an opportunity for you to identify yourself as a working group member or not a working group member. And really, we're trying to do these types of evaluations through our process. It's part of our key performance indicators for our community engagement plan overall. So we really appreciate it if all of you would take the survey. Again, it'll only take 2 to 3 minutes, I think, for you to complete that survey. So thanks again, we appreciate your participation in that.
Thanks, Eric. I think everyone can maybe skip that tech issues were a problem at the meeting. In your feedback. We know that. So I neglected to state that our operating principles and item 10 is an action, and I'm gonna suggest that we continue that for our next meeting. That will take us some time. We don't have that time, probably, or brain power, so let's continue our operating principles. I'm gonna take us to item 14, which are any final working group member comments, and then we're gonna go to item 15, which is public interest comments. Did any member of the working group feel like something they wanted to say was not said? This would be your final opportunity, and if you could keep it on point, that would be wonderful. Mia?
Yes, I really strongly recommend that some of the work we run through a pilot model, or, take a site that I know, take a site that Vince knows, and like run it through the gamut and just see all the barriers. And I feel like that would be a really good tool to be educational for, as you're talking to members in the community, and just lay it out. And I think it's really gonna be revealing, and then it starts to really kind of, hopefully begin to see where the policy pieces and the levers can actually affect the sort of situation on the ground.
Good suggestion. Other thoughts, final thoughts?
There's one hand raised online.
Let's take the online comment.
This is Christina Hill, and it would be helpful if people that spoke said their names ahead of time, just like I did, but I didn't before. But also, I didn't get the QR code. I mean, if you're online, how are you gonna scan that?
Eric will tell you.
If you can see the presentation, then you go back to the previous slide in the presentation. There is a SurveyMonkey link as well as a QR code, and if you can pull that slide up now, we can share that with you.
Maybe we could also share this via email to the group.
Yeah, and I'll just say it's, I'll read off the URL. It's www.surveymonkey.com/r/TLWG/eval, EVAL. And we'll drop that, we'll share that out with folks who are on it as well.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, we'll share that.
Oh, I got it. Thanks.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you for putting that up.
You got it. Final thoughts? Good, Ina?
I guess my thought is, one of my strengths is futuristic. So I'm imagining myself in the future justifying to a child why they don't have housing and what I did or didn't do to make that happen. So I'm ready for work.
It's a powerful image, thank you. Okay, thank you all. One last thing, item 15, public interest comments. This is our closing public interest comment period. So for members of the public that would like to address this committee, please either come to the podium and state your name, or if you're on Zoom, go ahead and use the raise hand feature now or dial *9, and TRPA staff will call on you. Please be aware that we are prohibited by law from taking immediate action on discussing issues raised by the public not listed on our agenda. Any members of the public in the room care to come to the podium? Dom, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I just want to share with everyone that you're having a lot of fun. At 1:58 this afternoon, I got an email from the city of Reno seeking input on community and fair housing. And they have a survey, they want to gather input on consolidated plan for housing needs and a regional fair housing study. So if you didn't get it up today, I can give you this link after the meeting.
You guys see John for housing in Reno. Jessica, any members of the public online have their hands raised?
There are no hands raised to comment.
No hand raised. Okay, perfect. Could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Emily, motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And we stand adjourned at 4:17. Thank you all for staying a little late. Not too bad. We'll see you next time.
It's